Hey there everyone. If you've been following all the posts which I've been doing on Facebook and the forum for the last couple of years really, I do regular posts talking about the new set effects that are coming out. In those posts I say whether or not the effect is good and I link to this guide. I've got two guides on the forum, one for equipment, one for trinket set effects. And in these I detail all that are there. I also detail the top 5 as well as some other ones which are special mentions. Now these guides are built for you to go and read and find out which ones are the good ones and that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of information, as well as this is not talking about specific classes. A lot of people come to me and they ask, I play Knight, which set effects are the best ones for me? And it's true, it is slightly different depending on which class you play. So I'm bringing out 3 videos now, and you'll know which class this particular video is covering because it's in the title of the video. And in each of these I'm going to go through the best equipment and trinket set effects. Now before we go through that, I'm going to first talk about set mixing. That is something which I briefly mention in these guides but don't go into great detail on, so we're going to talk about that in detail first of all, before then talking about the equipment set effects and the trinket set effects. There are links in the description to these guides as well as to those points in the video. I will also say that for each of these 3 videos, they each start exactly the same with the set mixing. I am basically making this as something which I can put on the start of all 3 videos. So if you've seen it for one of the videos, just skip forwards to the equipment and trinkets part. So to talk about set mixing first of all, the reason why we want to do set mixing for the set effects is because you have to set mix if you want to get any of the older effects. We pretty much need to replace our sets that we get with the new sets each time, with the stats increase each time, and we need to keep up in order to be able to crit in events and get good damage and that kind of stuff. So we need to be replacing them with the new sets. However, we might want to keep some of the older effects. And so in order to be able to set mix, it's important to know what you're losing by set mixing. So if you look at the set bonus here for equipment, we mainly want to look at the last one, so the 8 out of 8. All you get is the set effect, which if you're using a different glove for a different set effect, doesn't really matter. There's just a trade-off. You're losing the current one to gain a different effect. The other loss you're making is, in this case, 200 damage. Now that is not really that much. It doesn't matter at all. So really on equipment there is basically no loss by set mixing to add an old fabled glove. So you can choose whichever set effect you want. I mean, there's a bit of loss on stats on the exact glove, but like that doesn't matter. The effect you're adding is so important, so much more powerful, that it is absolutely worth your time set mixing to get a glove, an old fabled glove. Now for appearance, I want to mention set mixing here. Obviously there is no set bonus for a set effect, but if you have the VIP items, you may consider maybe thinking about doing set mixing here. For Knight, this is it's only worth it for Knight, maybe. Now the reason being is if you look at the 8 out of 8, there is crit damage rating. Crit damage rating is so important for our damage output that it's only worth losing that if what you're gaining is massive. Now for Wizard and Archer, the thing that you'd want to gain by set mixing, you want multiple copies of the 3 out of 8 set bonus, and that health is just not high enough. It's not worth doing the set mixing to get multiple copies of that. You're just going to lose so much more by losing that crit damage rating. However, for Knight, the health bonus is much larger, and it may be worth doing as a massive trade-off that you lose the damage output by losing all the crit damage rating for more defense with a much more health. I still probably wouldn't recommend that, but if you want to go full tanky Knight, which Knights are kind of tanky enough already, if you want to do that, then that is a trade-off you might consider. It's a lot more worth your while if you have the VIP items, so you can get many copies of that health bonus. It makes it a little bit more worth it if you're getting many copies of that. So going to trinkets. Trinkets is a little bit more complicated. However, it's where you can potentially get probably the biggest bonus, at least for Wizard and Archer. So the way the armor and health bonus works as the 3 out of 8 for equipment, appearance and trinkets is that for Knight the bonus is much higher on all 3. However, trinkets are used with exactly the same stats for Archer and Wizard, so they have a lot more armor and just armor for set mixing with trinkets. So it's a place where it is possible to set mix. As you can see I'm doing here, I'm using a VIP necklace and a VIP talisman so I can get 6 versions of that armor set bonus, which gives me a lot more armor than I would otherwise have. Now this is something which is generally considered to be the best thing right now, and I haven't ever highly recommended it. Maybe more recently I've mentioned it a bit more as being good, especially because, you know, I do it myself. I can't really say it's bad if I'm doing it myself, but I didn't recommend it years back because the thing is, if you look at the 8 out of 8 set bonus here, it gives crit rating. Crit rating is another important stat, just like the crit damage rating, and as that increases, it becomes harder and harder to do the set mixing while still being able to crit with your character. Both wizards and knights can somewhat get around this because they have auto crit skills that make everything crit for a short time, but archers don't, so archers will struggle the most to continue doing this as it goes into the future. And it may be the case that, you know, no class actually wants to set mix on their trinkets. We'll have to see how things go, but I'm just saying that for looking into the future, that set mixing on trinkets may be something that people don't want to do in the long run. But for now, it's just about fine, and the best way to set mix on trinkets is to get 2 fabled rings with 2 powerful set effects. So you choose those to be anything you want, and then because the dodge rating and the max mana, those set bonuses at 5 and 7, you don't need those at all. It doesn't matter about trying to get the 5 or 7. Instead, what you can do is with the 6 remaining items, you can get 2 versions of the 3 out of 8 set bonus. So you do 3 items from one set and 3 items from another set. I'm obviously not doing this because I'm using the VIP trinkets, but that's what you would do. So that's what I would recommend to everyone. As long as the crit rating isn't causing you problems, you can do that, and then you can use 2 rings, which are any rings you like, with powerful set effects on them. So I hope that covers the set mixing in general, and should hopefully have us all on the same page. So you know, this is what we do in order to get the fabled rings and the fabled gloves onto our characters. Fabled glove, very easy to do, and the fabled rings might have some issues with crit rating in the long run, but for now it is possible to set mix with both fabled rings to get 2 set effects here, and then also having the double armor bonus from 2 lots of 3 out of 8. So we're going to take a look at all the useful equipment set effects for Wizard. Now, equipment set effects in general, they are damage buffs. While trinkets focus on defense, equipment focuses on damage. That said, there are some gloves which do some defensive stuff, but typically they are for damage, elemental damage, damage buffs, that kind of stuff. Now, when it comes to gloves, there is one particular glove that stands out above all the rest as just super powerful, and that is the Shining Crystal Vambraces. The damage buff you get from this, alongside the fact that it's got a 30-second cooldown, just outclasses so many of the other damage buffs from gloves. And that's just one aspect of it. The defense buff of 50% damage reduction is enormous. That is just ridiculous, and going for 5 seconds is nice. Then, yeah, just stack that with any other damage reduction buff and you're basically invincible. It's so powerful. The increased move speed is very nice. I actually used this, an older version of this glove in my farming setup. And then we've got the stun that is just a ridiculous stun. It goes almost off the screen, stunning everything there for 2 seconds. So if the damage reduction and the move speed doesn't help you enough surviving, well, the stunned enemies will too. So yeah, this just has it all, and on a 30-second cooldown, it's absolutely ridiculous. There's no way really any glove can beat this. But anyway, let's have a look at it, the effect in some combat. I've got some enemies here. We're going to try and show what happens when it triggers. So there we go. It's a big blast. You can see the effect on yourself quite clearly. You run a little bit faster, you get damage buff. You can see 149,000 here. It's going to go down to 124 after the buff ends. So that's what happens, and you get all the effects as I showed in the description there. So yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous. You wouldn't really want to use any other glove for most general cases, but we're going to talk through a few gloves that you may want to use for particular cases. So another one to think about is the Swift Scale Vambraces, Swift Scales that is, sorry. This is for water builds. Now, even if you have a water build, you probably want to use the glove we just talked about. But this is something else to consider, that if you have really high water and it's way above your other elements and stuff, and all your damage is coming from water, you may want to consider doing this. This is a lot stronger for Archer because that focuses on basic attacks, but it is possible to use on the other classes if you just get used to using some basic attacks when your skills are off cooldown. That kind of stuff. Typically the way I play is I'll use skills and then I'll run around when I don't have skills active, or I'll just, stagger my skills carefully so I most of the time have the skill active. But if you have a big water build and you want to try this out, it is definitely possible to use and very powerful. Now the bit you're looking at here is at 300% water. It only does it to a single target. The non-elemental damage, that 200%, goes in a blast around that, but it's really that water that does enormous damage to a single target on basic attacks. That's what you get all the power here from. So yeah, it's for water builds and it's pretty good. I will say the other glove is better in general, and just even if you got a water build, it's probably better. But there we go, that big water blast doing tons of damage there. These enemies take extra damage from water too, so it does make it slightly biased for that. But anyway, very powerful and something you might want to consider. The next glove to talk about is the Alex COA, the Creator's Vambraces. This is for PvE defense. Now, the first glove that we talked about, giving that 50% damage reduction for 5 seconds every 30 seconds, is very, very useful for defense, and it covers most bases. However, there are particular challenges which we might face where our drakes are useless, because there's loads of enemies that come and attack it. They just kill off the drakes immediately, and the defenses on Wizard, while they're good, they don't really cover from actually the really tough challenges. Wizards cannot tank like knights. They can't make themselves invincible, and they don't have decoys, which are ultimately a lot better than drakes. So there are certain challenges where you can really struggle to survive, and this is the kind of glove which you can put in to survive in those cases. It's also worth noting that in party play, if you all have this out and stuff, then you can use it carefully and just have massive defense and just all fight from range. But anyway, this glove, the 10 seconds of the Hound, incredibly good for keeping you alive. Just for those 10 seconds, you pretty much don't have to worry about dying, and it doesn't matter about the dog damage, just ignore that. So anyway, we're going to show it in some combat here. I didn't equip it. Okay, equipped it now. So basically you want to stand from, it's best to show from range. When it triggers, little Hound will run out and run into the combat. You can see them there all attacking it, and there's a timer on the Hound, so you can see when it's gonna be dead and they attack you again. Pretty useful. Comes up in certain cases, but ultimately not as good as the first one we talked about. The next one is for guild raids. Now this particular set effect does not work unless you have the full set. That is a bug, and hopefully it gets fixed at some point, but unfortunately it's just one of the later effects that they made and was caught under that bug, like all the late set effects. So this one is incredibly powerful and very surprising. We didn't really realize how good it was when it originally came out, so I think a lot of people don't have the full set still around. I have the full set, which I use for some guild raids if I want to. But anyway, making an enemy take 20% extra damage from every single source forever as soon as this triggers is so useful, and the fact it has no cooldown means that you can trigger this on multiple enemies quite easily, whatever you're attacking. Now basic attacks are not really the way Wizards play, so for every other aspect of the game you kind of want a different glove, but for guild raids where you're attacking just one enemy, it makes a lot of sense to have this. Now the way Wizards play guild raids is they'll go next to the boss and then hit autoplay, and autoplay won't really use many basic attacks, but hopefully this will trigger at an early-ish stage in the guild raid, and then you'll do extra damage for the rest of the guild raid. That's what you're hoping. It's not that reliable, but it's a slight bonus for guild raids if you have it. Now unfortunately I can't show this set effect because I need to have the full 8 out of 8, and I'm not going to go do that. Basically it just triggers and pulls the enemies into one enemy, and that's when you know it's happened. So lastly we have 2 more set effects. Now these are not really as good as the previous ones, and they don't have their niche case where you might want to use them, other than the fact I think they're worth noting because they do efficient elemental damage. So both of them have 30-second cooldown, and they deal 300% of a certain element in an area. which is pretty nice. And if you're of the build of that element, then that's actually pretty good. It's slightly more easier to play with than the Swift Scales Vambraces. However, the Swift Scale Vambraces is so much more powerful for water than these are for their equivalent of fire and nature. But still, they're worth noting, and let's have a look at them in some combat. So first one is the nature one, and you can see their little nature blast, well, little green blast I mean, and then some damage over time on the enemies, adding up to the 300%. And then we're going to have a look at the fire one. The fire one will drop a big meteor down on the enemies and hit all the enemies that it lands on. So we'll just trigger it here. And there we go. Big meteor came down, blast, and damaged them all. Pretty useful, and 30-second cooldown, not bad at all. So they can be good for elemental damage. But like I say, when it comes to equipment, there's really the one and only Shining Crystal Vambraces. If you don't have this effect, make sure you keep an eye out for it, and when it gets repeated, grab it and use it forever, because it is so powerful over all the other set effects that it just outclasses all of them. So now we're going to talk about the best trinket set effects. Earlier on in the video, we talked about how the equipment set effects were all about damage and less about defense. There were some defensive ones in there. I mean, the best set effect has massive defense on it. However, when it comes to trinkets, they are all about defense. There's almost no damage in them at all. So looking at them, what they really are going to do to your character are round off the defense on the class. You've got all the defensive skills. You've got lifesteal as well, which comes into play a little bit less with wizard because you don't do much basic attacks. But you've got those things. You've got maybe the glove set effect is going to come into play and help out there. But you can put together a couple of rings which are going to do massively boost your defensive capability. And the best way to do that, I believe, looking at all the set effects and what they do, is to have a combination of healing and damage reduction. It's important to think about the combination here because you can have two rings, and you don't want to do two healing rings because they might just both trigger at the same time, and then they counteract with each other. So having healing and damage reduction seems to be the best way to get the most defense. For that, you're looking at the best healing ring and the best defense ring. The best healing ring is the Fire's Birthright Seal. The healing spring is just incredibly powerful. It doesn't matter where you run in the map, it still heals you. 25% each second is going to keep you alive very nicely, and going for 7 seconds is longer than what a lot of set effects do. Then the defense skill one, the defense effect, Aegis of Cementa Leota, 50% for 5 seconds. That is enormous. That keeps you alive super well. I would say in general, while the 7 seconds healing kind of feels like it's better, in practice it's often better. I would say that in theory, the damage reduction is a lot better, and when the going gets tough, it's better to have damage reduction than healing, because if your health is dropping slowly, you can react to that and much better, and you can heal yourself up when needed. Whereas from healing, your health could be bouncing all over the place and you don't know whether you're about to die or not. So damage reduction generally stronger, but this combination of the two is incredibly powerful and the best by far. Going to have a look at them in combat now, so we're going to put both of them on. And you'll see here immediately, Aegis of Cementa Leota. It triggers exceptionally fast and goes for 5 seconds. It actually does it as a party damage reduction for those 5 seconds. The other effect, the Healing Spring, this triggers off basic attacks. So you can see here, we've just triggered and I run around a bit faster. You can see the effect on yourself plus that Healing Spring, and it's going to heal me wherever I am. It's important to note actually that the Fire's Birthright Seal triggers on basic attacks, which is very important on Wizard because we don't really use basic attacks much. We can choose when to trigger it. So as you get attacked, the Aegis of Cementa Leota triggers, you get the damage reduction for 5 seconds. That keeps you alive exceptionally well. And then once that ends, if you start having a bit of trouble, well then you can switch to basic attacks. You can trigger the Fire's Birthright Seal, the Healing Spring, and also you can maybe trigger the Shining Crystal Vambraces if you have that. Either or both triggering is going to keep you alive brilliantly for the next 5 to 7 seconds. And so having these rings, you can probably then see the combination of these 3 set effects can keep you alive beautifully. And that's on top of all your skills that you have already. So yeah, set effects are very important, and this is why we need to be using the best ones. So taking a look at what the different options are, if we don't have these best 2 rings, there are a few alternatives. Unlike with the gloves, where it's like that one stands out above everything else, with the rings, there are a few which are reasonably good. They kind of do the job, but they're just not quite as good as the best ones. So the alternative for healing is the White Forest Seal. This is well known as the Crystal Healing Ring, and it heals you by, just about the same kind of amount as the Healing Spring, but it goes for 5 seconds rather than 7, and it's a bit iffy because it can be destroyed. The Healing Spring works anywhere in the map. This one only works next to it, and if it gets destroyed by an attack, then you stop getting the heal. So even though the stun's very useful, it's definitely worse than the Healing Spring. Let's show this in combat now. As I get hit, this comes out, it stuns the enemies, and you see they're actually attacking it. They didn't quite really do enough to destroy it in time, but certainly in PvP it gets destroyed instantly, and it does get destroyed quite quickly if you have a lot of enemies attacking it. So that's that healing ring. Then alternatives for the damage reduction. We've got the Earth Spirit Seal. This is actually a stronger effect than the Aegis of Cementa Leotta. Just basically adding adding a stun onto the end. However, it's got 45 seconds cooldown rather than 30 seconds, so it's definitely a lot worse. The other one is the Phoenix Law Seal. This again has 45 seconds cooldown, so it's worse in that respect, and it's a 40% damage reduction rather than a 50%. Also, both these effects are not party effects, they only work for yourself. So let's have a look at these now. Earth Spirit Seal. As we get hit, it's going to trigger, and there we go, we get the shield on it. Looks like a shield, but it is definitely damage reduction, and then at the end it's going to blast and going to stun the enemies, as you can see here. Now to look at the other one. We'll put that on. The Phoenix Law Seal. Now this triggers on basic attacks. Going to do a few basic attacks. There we go, get the shield on us. If you look at my damage, it has not increased at all, despite having this effect. The ring says that it does that, but it doesn't actually increase your damage. It just gives you some damage reduction. So those are the options for the healing and damage reduction. You really want to just interchangeably use them if you don't have the best two rings there. Other than that, there are various options for defense from the rings, which are just not quite as good as these. So one other thing which comes up quite a lot is health shields. Now I call them health shields. Basically what they do is they work like a protection bubble. They add a shield on top which takes a certain amount of damage, then it bursts, and then it's gone, you start taking damage again. Ocean's Tear Seal, this is the best of the bunch. It's got the 30 seconds cooldown, it gives 25% health shield, which is kind of standard, and then the move speed buff is very nice too. So let's show this in combat now. As I get hit, we'll see it trigger at some point. The health shields have slightly lower trigger rate by the looks of things. They're not so reliable as the other effects. Is it going to happen? Did I put it on? So now we've got it here, the shield going on here. We're going to run around a little bit faster while it's going on. It does look very pretty, but it's just not as strong as the damage reduction. And, if you run through the numbers and stuff, it's just nowhere near as powerful as the rings which we went through so far. Now, for PvE defense, this is where you might want to change your rings very slightly. So when we go against really, really tough challenges, we may find that having a healing ring just isn't going to help, because we're going to die too quickly from attacks. And that's where the Demonic Essence Seal can come into effect. This is a copy of an equipment set effect that we talked about earlier on, so I'm not really going to go into the details of how powerful it is. However, if you are to use this, the combination that you want to use it in is by removing the healing aspect of your two rings, and you use this with your damage reduction ring. Hopefully you have the Shining Crystal Vambraces as well, and then you've got two damage reduction effects that can trigger, and you've also got this Hound which can work. Now the reason why you'd use this rather than the glove, using the two together is pointless. They both have the same effect, it doesn't change anything, just the chance of it triggering, it triggers sooner. The reason why you'd use this one rather than the glove, it's just dependent on whether you want to use two rings or you want to use that glove slot for something else. So that's where it comes into play. And lastly, what we have is for guild raids. Now I said basically nothing adds damage on the rings, and that's not, well, I say basically nothing because there are these rings. There's the Burning Might Seal and the Fireburst Band. These two don't really help that much for Wizard. They rely on doing consistent basic attacks, which Wizard doesn't do. And when you do guild raids, you use autoplay, it uses skills the whole time. It's very it doesn't do enough basic attacks to actually really trigger this, but compared to no effect at all, this is better than nothing. So by using both of them, the damage that actually stacks up to 20%. It's one of the very few cases where using the same effects, they can trigger and do extra stuff. So that you can get up to 20% damage buff, but in reality that's not going to happen. These are just a small boost for guild raids. So showing this in combat, you'll see it triggers very quickly, very frequently, because I've got both rings triggering, and you can see them by the little burst of fire around me, well, burst of red anyway. And you can see my damage has increased to 133,000, and then now when the effect's ended, it's gone back to 122. So that's what these do. They're not particularly powerful, you don't want to use them anywhere, but for a boost in guild raid, they are the two rings which help out. So that concludes everything I wanted to talk about with set effects. Just to summarize the trinkets, that what you want to go for is a combination of healing and damage reduction, with the best two being Fire's Birthright Seal and Aegis of Cementa Leota. You can change out those for other healing effects or defense effects, which a few of them are quite good, but they're just not as good as those first two. We've then got the Demonic Essence Seal, which you can sometimes use in some hard PvE content to get that Hound effect if you want to try that out. And then there are a couple of rings which you can use for damage buffs in guild raids, which won't really help, but they might help a little bit. So that summarizes everything. I hope everything has been clear in this video. This video is only up to date to the 35th glove and the 34th ring in my guide. Anything that's come out after that is after the time of me making this video. But they've basically been repeating older effects, so it should be quite simple to watch this video and read the effects and go, okay, well, I know this later glove is a copy of the glove he's talking about, so you can work it out all like that. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and it's now shown you exactly which effects are good for Wizard. Anything which is in the other videos for the other classes, but not in this one, it's because it's just not worthwhile for Wizard. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the video soon.